I didn't know what the next slide.
Okay, committee, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Welcome, everybody, to Senate Judiciary. Some new faces up here, and we all look forward to getting to know all of the constituent groups a little bit better. Look forward to working with all of you. A little bit of a late start this morning. We had an educational meeting upstairs from our partners over at DCI. Some very sobering statistics about things going on out across our state with regard to fentanyl and other illicit drugs. But so we've got lots of work to do over the next couple of weeks and some catch up to do. I really appreciate the opportunity to work with all of you on the committee. I'm absolutely thrilled. I feel like I've won the lottery with our wonderful staff, and then I've got the best senators out of the 31 upstairs. So let's, committee, let's go to work. Judy, would you please call the roll?
Senator Case?
Present.
Senator Cooper?
Here.
Senator Furphy?
Here.
Senator Schuler?
Here.
Chairman Landon?
Here. Okay, committee, the first bill for our consideration is Senate File 32, prohibiting drones over penal institutions. And I'm looking out at the director, if you might be willing, director, to come down front and catch us up on this bill.
Chairman Landon, Senate Judiciary Committee members, my name is Dan Shannon. I'm the Director for the Wyoming Department of Corrections. Thank you for having me here today. I would just provide a few thoughts on Senate File 32. As you're aware, it worked through the interim committee. Unfortunately, the downside of technology, there's always a good and bad, and it's no different in our correctional systems. And today I only can speak on behalf of the state institutions, not the county jails and things of that nature. I have no authority to speak on them.
Director, can I ask you to get a little closer to that microphone just to make sure everyone's
Certainly.
hears? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've only had a few incidents that involve drones within our institutions. It's only a matter of time. Now, we currently, the FAA does have a block where it clearly on the mapping, it shows not to fly over penal institutions. We have a contraband law on our statute, but we don't have anything with the delivery. And throughout our nation, across our nation, institutions are having more and more episodes. It's only a matter of time. We have nothing to address our delivery. Now, I certainly can understand the recreation of flying drones. But I have no way, it's my responsibility to ensure the inmates, the staff, and the public are safe. And I have no way of knowing what is neither friend nor foe. To me, there's three major threats. It's the smuggling of a payload onto institutional grounds, intentional disruption, or actually surveillance. Now we can look and say, well, we have Google Earth, and that is true. And I'm fine with that, but I'm not okay with handing out the blueprints of, say, in our penitentiary or our medium correctional facility in Torrington. And the reason being, when you're having live feed, you're exposing those who are confined, or exposing those who have potentially could be re-victimized, seeing that type of incident. I have drafted rules for review, depending on how this legislation will turn out. And to me, the key terms are reasonable. FAA, I think it's US 1832 clearly states you're not shooting down drones. That's not the intent. The intent is it's a public safety matter. We in corrections, we have no way we can call law enforcement. We have no way of trying to deter. We have no way of stopping. To me, I'd have to secure institutional grounds, which is very disruptive. I would have to secure the inmates and staff. and then proceed from there. Regarding, I think there may be some concerns regarding transparency. I, for one, I've offered this past year, we've offered to all Wyoming media intensive tours of our facilities. And we can look in the future and say, well, if we develop a statute, maybe you're not always going to be sitting there, someone else with a different opinion may. But if there was an actual episode at our facilities, bad things happen in corrections, I couldn't imagine being an incident commander and have to make determination if drones are flying over. To me, I don't see, it's contradictory to trying to keep the folks safe. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions you may have.
Director, we appreciate you being here. Committee, any questions for our director? Senator Case, and then we'll come to Senator Cooper.
Probably very naive questions, Mr. Director, and thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if there's a penal institution and there's a boundary to that institution, and if I'm pretty good pitcher, I can throw something over the wall of that institution. It's a made up thing, but that's currently illegal, and you can do something about that now, right? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, depending on the nature of the item you're throwing over, if it's defined as contraband by our statute, yes.
Mr. Chairman, just
Go ahead, Senator.
follow up kind of down the same line. So if I have a big old slingshot, I can get a little farther away. In college, we used to have those water balloon things. They were really big and they would really go. That would obviously be illegal too, already.
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, yes, if it was defined under contraband, maybe tobacco, a weapon, some type of illegal drug, yes, it would be illegal, yes.
So I'm not trying to drain this out to the nth degree, but it seems I'm trying to understand the difference between flying an airplane over it and doing this, and why the same statutes wouldn't already work. And then I'll just add a tag on, in terms of photography, I'm a private pilot myself, or say, I'm not sure how, I could fly my plane over Torrington.
Yes.
And take a picture, a really good picture, a really good quality picture. And then I could probably get as good a picture as a drone could get with that. Of course, I'm an FAA approved pilot. I mean, there's lots of regulation there, but what is the difference in that aspect? And thank you, Mr. Chairman, I'll shut up. Thank you, sir.
No, very good. Senator, Director, what about all of those thoughts?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, thank you for your question. I appreciate it. To me, it would be about the delivery and as well as the distance. And the example would be 4 of our 5 facilities set outside the location. You're not shooting a slingshot. You're not throwing it. Mm-hmm. If you look at our locations, excluding Riverton, our Wyoming Honor Farm, it's located within the city limits. The other facilities are set back where you're not going to have access that I'm aware of any slingshot or able to throw. Concerning flying over, I don't have the concern that you take a quality picture. I do have a concern if you're identifying doors, numbers, zones, the officer in the yard, the inmate in the yard. Once you start identifying that, now there's issues it's disruptive inside that facility.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. Senator
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, one of the concerns I've heard is from the media, they feel like this may be restrictive on their rights. If a media outlet came to you and asked permission, is there a possibility that could happen rather than just flying over and doing their surveillance, if you will, whatever they may think they have to fly for? Is there a situation where you would give permission for this type of flight?
Mr. Chairman,
go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, absolutely, and it's defined in our rules as well. It's defined in the Act as well as our rules. If it's an identification of actual door numbers, things of that nature, I would question that. But as far as seeing the diagrams, the outlines of the facility, I don't have an issue with that. As I said earlier, I sent a notice to all Wyoming media to come tour our facilities and see our facilities. I feel comfortable with that drone. That drone is not dropping a weapon or fentanyl and things of that nature. So yes.
Thank you, Senator. And so just as a quick follow-up, Director, you've already contemplated, it sounds like, the opportunity for someone to make a special request within the rules that you've already begun to draft.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I would anticipate that.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm fine with that.
Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two questions, if I could. The first one, again, not having served on the interim Judiciary Committee, I'm not sure what the impetus was, but I'm assuming that this has happened in other places, maybe other institutions. And I guess I'm asking, what kinds of things do they deliver? Is it mainly contraband? Have there been some cases in the past where that has happened?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, thank you. We've only had 2 small incidents here in Wyoming, and they involve tobacco. But it's a matter of time. I have weekly communications with correctional directors across our nation, and we've been very fortunate. Most states are dealing, and I can provide, if the board, statistics from, certain states like Georgia and things of that nature, federal prisons, and drones today are able to fly 5-6 pound. The Amazon drones are capable of doing that. I believe there's a lot of positive use for the drones. I can see it to save staffing, for surveillance, utility companies. There's a number of reasons. And I think it goes back to the chairman's question about, would you anticipate people doing it? But also, there's a number, it's a matter of time. A number of institutions across our nation are having some serious drugs and weapons being dropped in their yards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wondered what, I know that this bill basically authorizes Department of Corrections to be able to take reasonable actions to promulgate rules. Do you have any idea what some of those actions might be?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, absolutely. I don't have an interest in shooting down drones. I want to be very clear about that. I do have it is my sole responsibility to make sure folks are safe. And with that, we would secure the grounds immediately. And depending on the footprint of the institution, as I mentioned earlier, Riverton's much different than our penitentiary. We'd secure the area, we'd secure the inmates, we'd notify law enforcement. We would attempt to notify or obtain the location where the drone has been. Yes. The example is at our penitentiary, the area search would be in the fence. If you're looking at our Riverton location, you have hundreds of acres that you're searching. And we would have to make sure things are locked. And that becomes very disruptive. And to have inmates at this moment, we got to lock you down. We have to secure you. Now we're going to have to go and search this type of property because we've seen the drone fly over. It could have been very well from, say, someone from the Modelers Park when it was in Riverton flying to someone with, I don't know what the intent would be. So I have to go search. So those rules, number one, would be secure the facility, make sure the inmates and staff are safe, notify law enforcement, and then search for contraband.
Thank you.
Senator, you good? Any other questions for the Director? Director, thank you. Stay
Thank you.
close for us if you would. We reserve the right to come back to you with
Certainly,
another
Mr.
question.
Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to open it up for anyone else who would like to testify on Senate File 32. Would anyone else in the room like to testify on Senate File 32? Judy, anybody online who would like to testify this morning on 32? Or are they just waiting in the wings for the next one? Yeah, okay. Well, we're gonna close testimony then. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Moved by Senator Cooper. Committee, I'm going to not require a second. I forgot to mention that up front, but if we move something, that's good enough. I think we've been around the block. So, okay, let's work the bill, committee. Any proposed amendments to this bill? Let's go page 1. Anything on page 2? How about page 3? Page 4? Interesting on page 5 that the draft includes underlined language. I'm not quite sure why that is, but page 6. Go ahead, Senator Case.
Well, Mr. Chairman, a question on page 6. If this is needed, why, and I know it's going to take some little time for the rulemaking part, but why wouldn't we go effective immediately?
It's a great question.
But I do understand that criminal, Mr. Chairman, that, I mean, our citizens need to know what's illegal. I mean, you can't just make something illegal tomorrow, but this is kind of in the middle. I
think-
suspect people already know that if they, at all of the Romanettes, 1, 2, and 3 on page 3 and 4, if it was anything but a drone, that would be illegal now. So,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why we wouldn't make it.
No, I think-
immediate, but I don't know what I'm talking
I
about.
think that's a good suggestion, and I bet the committee might support that, Senator, if you want to make that motion. We'd
Well-
have to allow for the rulemaking.
Could we get some feedback about that effective date?
Yeah, before we do that, as the director comes up, Senator Furphy,
Well,
we need a green button if you would. Turn
question,
on,
Mr. Chairman.
turn on your microphone.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My question is, why should we not do it immediately? On page 5, the Department of Correction needs to promulgate rules. And that may give them some time to put those rules together.
Very good point. Director, would you mind real quickly, what are your feelings about the committee maybe putting an effective immediately upon your drafting of rules, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I have the rules drafted at this time. I didn't believe it was my place to be asking legislators on as far as signature or the time span. This is an issue we've been dealing with for a period of time. It may be tomorrow, it may be 5 years from now, I'm not certain. I am aware that the Department of Corrections is exempt as far as exposing the rules to safety factors, but these rules would not be one of them. It's pretty clear and forward. So I don't believe it's my place to say when it would benefit the Department of Corrections for safety matters as soon as possible.
Sounds like you'd be okay, though, if we said, as soon as you get the rules in place, we'd like this law to go into effect.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
And by the way, you're welcome to ask us anytime for anything. Whether or not we can abide or vote aye on it, we'll just have to find that out. But yeah,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Director. Senator Case, back to you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I'm thinking about this a little bit, but, I've seen statutes where we authorize the rulemaking to proceed before the effective date of the law. But there's also an emergency rulemaking process that's quicker than the other rules. Why don't we change the effective date to immediately? Let folks hash it over, and if there's a problem that comes about because of that, we could fix that, or our friends down the hall could fix it. But I would move to make it effective immediately, in the sense that if, move this along.
Okay, discussion. Any discussion? All those in favor of Senator Case's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no? Judy, do you have that to make that effective immediately? Anything else on the bill, senators? Okay. Judy, when you're all set, would you please take roll on Senate File 32?
Senator Case,
Aye.
Senator Cooper,
Aye.
Senator Furphy,
Aye.
Senator Schuler. Aye. Chairman Landon.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, there were 5 ayes on this bill.
Outstanding work by the interim Judiciary Committee on that bill.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Case.
I did note that the wording that comes out on the screen, we had 2 ayes, 1 by, and 1 aye.
Well, the question is if it was a majority, and I think.
Well, now we
maybe-
got an aye.
Yeah, there we go.
With
There's an aye.
EYE.
There you go. That's great.
Don't enunciate enough.
That's great. Okay, the next bill for our consideration, and just for everyone, we are gaveling in early, much to the chagrin of several chairmen, but upstairs, we're going to gavel in early at 9:30, which crimps our time a little bit. My hope today is that we can at least get through the testimony part of the next bill, Senate File 34. It's an important bill. I want to get to it right away, so we're going to do that. Senate File 34, the interim committee sponsored this bill, trespass by small unmanned aircraft. I would invite anyone who would like to come forward and catch us up on this bill to please do so. Senator Cooper, do you have a 30,000-foot view from the interim work that you did on this bill that you want to kind of set the stage, and then we'll go to testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did take quite a bit of testimony on this bill in the interim. Worked it pretty hard. One of the questions that came up is immediate airspace trespassing? And the answer is yes, it is. How high is immediate airspace? And I don't believe it's FFA, the consensus that's out there is 500 feet or higher is not immediate airspace, but 500 feet or lower is. And so there's not a hard number in statutes out there that we can find, but it's recognized that 50 feet or lower is definitely immediate airspace. Between 50 feet and 500 is likely immediate airspace. So we didn't put a number in there, but there's discretionary issues there. Another issue was, let me think, substantial interference of a landowner's property. That has been established in law, and it's pretty clear. There are definitions for that out there. Thirdly was a question of knowingly, I guess if you will, or intentionally flying over somebody else's airspace. With any of these drones, they're basically same as a cell phone. They have GPS data on them, and they know exactly where that drone is at most of the time. I suppose there's incidences where it could wander off, but for the most part, the operator of that drone knows exactly where his drone is. He knows whether he's in somebody else's airspace or not. So those are the kind of questions we addressed, and I think we covered them pretty well as we went through the bill, and I'm pretty satisfied with where we're at on it.
Well, thank you, Senator. I kind of came to you, cold on that one, but appreciate the thoughts that you bring from the interim. I'm gonna go to testimony on the bill. I would invite any who would like to testify on Senate File 34. Please come forward. Come forward, Jim or Brett. Good job. Lead us away here. Give us a little perspective on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. I did provide some testimony on this during the interim. What's happening, and it's throughout the state, out in rural areas next to towns, people with drones are flying over. And, sometimes they're harassing livestock. I think we've got some other laws that take into account that. It's just, people ask me, well, does the legislature need to meet every year? And I think this is an example of why 100 years ago we didn't have technology changes. So we appreciate what this bill does. In retrospect, I would ask that on line 15, page 1, that substantially would be removed. That seems to, in my opinion, that puts the burden on the landowner to, what is significantly interferes. That could set, depending on how everything works out, that could set a pretty high bar. That's, I know it's used in other places, but it's kind of something that's, in my opinion, is a little nebulous. So to make that a little bit stricter, that if it just interferes. And a question does come up that was raised by some of my members, that if a drone is coming over, other than going, finding out whose it is, and I understand that in a few years, all drones will have to be putting out a signal that can be traced back to that drone. But in other instances, before something bad happens, we have, as landowners, have the opportunity to reduce the threat. So is there something that we can do to bring that drone down before it does actual property damage? This bill doesn't address that, so that's maybe a topic for a different way, but a different day. But if we could take out that substantially, that word, that would lower the burden of the landowner to be able to get that prosecuted. We've had other instances, with criminal trespass, that it's tough to get prosecuted, and for whatever reasons, it doesn't get prosecuted. And so if we could take out that word substantially, it would put the burden more on the owner or the operator of the drone rather than a landowner. That's a request I have. One thing as I brought up in the interim, one thing we don't want to do, and this bill doesn't do it, but I want to make it completely plain and out there. We don't want to restrict the rights of people that have the rights to come on our property with a drone. And I'll use the example of pipelines, electrical lines. For electrical lines, after a storm, the power's out, they got to find out where the line's down. If there's a pipeline leak, they got to find out where the leak is. And after a storm, sometimes it's a little muddy. And my members would rather have them use a drone to be able to find it and go right to that spot rather than have to patrol the whole line and perhaps do some other property damage, making ruts, et cetera. We don't want to, in this bill, in my opinion, does not do that, but we want to make it plain that we are not in any attempt trying to restrict the rights of people that have a legal right to be there with their drone. A lot of times that's good technology to use. With that, Mr. Chairman, committee, I would sit for any questions you may have for me.
Thank you, Mr. Moline. Appreciate that. Senators, any questions of the Farm Bureau? Thank you for touching on that issue. Right away, my mind went to our rural electric cooperatives, and I just can't imagine that enforcement would come out there if we've got one of our power companies, trying to do some work and whatever. And I think you're right, Ms. Merlene. We'll watch it as we go along, but I can't imagine that this bill interferes with that, or that there would be any overstep of enforcement in it in a situation like that. So appreciate you touching on that.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cooper.
Mr. Moline, in the case of commercial applications like that, wouldn't that utility company, pipeline company have a right-of-way through there? And I would assume that right-of-way would include the ability to access with a drone, whether it specifically does or not. Wouldn't there be a right-of-way there?
Mr. Merlene, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Cooper, I believe you are correct. That has been some previous testimony. They do have a right-of-way. They do have a reason to be there. That's not trespassing. And we dang sure don't want to stop them from being able to do their job to get the power back on, get the pipeline fixed, et cetera. A water breach on a irrigation canal.
Senator Case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, so if a utility company is flying their utility line, or, it could be telecom, electricity pipeline, like you mentioned, do you expect them to fly the right of way, or can they cross your property to take the shortest distance? Or how about a lessee that's oil and gas? Do they have to follow a certain route that you may have specified how their vehicles access your property? You expect their aerial vehicles to follow the same route?
Good question, Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, what I would assume would happen is that they would take the most direct route, and they would not be hovering over an area, my house. They would be probably, I don't know much about drones, so I'm kind of speculating, which is always dangerous to do, but I would assume that they would come out higher. When they reach the point where they need to be, they could come down lower. So that, going from one point to another at a higher altitude isn't going to be an interference. And if it wasn't determined to be an interference, they still have a legal right to be there. As far as how that works in the agreement, I don't know. That might be something, a change in technology that we need to adapt our easements and right of ways to deal with.
Mr. Chairman, may I follow
Go
up just
ahead,
a little
you
bit?
bet, Senator.
So the situation sort of depends on the facts, obviously, but if your family's having a barbecue in the backyard and a drone just goes across one pass, doesn't hover, is that interference?
Mr. Moline.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, that's, an individual, it would depend on that individual, how that, at that time. Flying directly over, if they have a legal right to be there, probably not. But
Mr. Chairman, it's not clear to me that a
Senator.
utility company has a legal right to be off the right of way. I'm just trying to understand. It gets kind of gray in here pretty fast, so I'm trying to find the door.
No, Senator, I'm in the same place. I mean, and Mr. Moline, you pointed out, this is a new piece of law that we're entering into here. And so, we're just trying to get a grip on things, just like you are. So go ahead. Maybe.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think, this brings up that, in the future, the easements that my grandfather made 100 years ago, almost 100 years ago, my great-grandfather 100 years ago, are much different than the easements that we have now. We've had to adapt, and Senator Case, this is probably, something that we need to look at in our future agreements, and we need to probably quantify, or I don't know, we need to have that understanding. I don't know if we are there yet or not. We tried to deal with this drone issue 10, 15 years ago when we were waiting for the federal government to come out with their rules. Now we're dealing with it here in the state of Wyoming, and new technology, new information. We'll have to deal with it. But again, my whole impetus on this is somebody has a legal right. We don't want to stop that. It's the illegal that we want to put the kibosh to.
Okay. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Moline, when you first mentioned about the substantially maybe taking that out, I started thinking about why it was in there maybe in the first place. Because at first I thought maybe that really does need to be taken out. But I started thinking about a couple of situations that come to mind. One, some teenagers were working on a little class project. Their drone pops into landowners' land just, maybe just briefly, maybe a couple of times, working on a project. if, obviously, if there were cows, you know, on the land and they were, you know, interfering with the cattle or other things like that, I can certainly understand why substantially could be out of there. But I just wonder, you know, we wouldn't want to see those teenagers, you know, hauled off to jail for, what is it, 6 months, or have to pay a fine of $750. So I'm kind of wondering if maybe we should leave it in. Not that I don't think ranchers and landowners generally are the type to do the knee-jerk thing, but that, after I thought about it, what's your thoughts again on that?
Go ahead, Mr. Merlin.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I appreciate having that lower bar for the protection of the landowner. There is always going to be instances where mistakes happen. And in my experience, the courts have been very understanding. You know, if you come onto somebody's property by 10 feet, that's much different than being over 100 feet, a mile. So that, you know, the courts do have the options of taking into account, you know, that the penalties that you mentioned, ma'am, I believe are the maximum. You know, so the courts can go lower, and typically, you know, courts do take into account. They don't have to, but they can. But sometimes inadvertent things happen that can have, you know, but I would appreciate having the word substantial taken out, and I'll sit by that, ma'am.
Okay.
We can agree to disagree. I will put it that
Okay.
way, ma'am. Thank you.
Mr. Merlin, thanks.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate all your
Any other
comments.
questions?
We're gonna get to some other folks
Okay.
who want
Thank you.
to testify on Senate File 34. Jim, you're next up. We'll go to Rick here, and then you're next up. How about that? Mr. Kaysen, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rick Kaysen, and I'm here on behalf of Rocky Mountain Power. So since there was a lot of discussion about electric utilities and the pipelines, I thought I'd just segue in and maybe just put that to rest. I do appreciate Mr. Moline's comments with respect to the need to get to facilities and to infrastructure and that as well. So I apologize. So just a couple of quick comments. Rocky Mountain Power would be there for a definitive purpose, and that would be for perhaps maintenance, responding to an urgency like restoring power and things of that nature. And so when we think about the definitive purpose for being on the properties, that's why we are there. We're not there for any other purpose. To Senator Cooper's question, staying within the right-of-ways, and again, the Senator Case's comment about access to the facilities, we would take the direct route, especially with urgencies and emergencies, and that may require flying over other properties. And again, it would not be for any other intent except to get to our facilities, again, for maintenance or emergency or urgency response, something of that nature. There would be no hovering over Sunday gathering for a picnic or something like that. And if those incidents did take place, I am well assured that some assessment would be taken of those types of incidents, and there would be some type of personnel action taken, if I may. So hopefully those comments, sir, and committee members would kind of shed some light why it's important for a utility, electric utility, to be able to gain access to those pieces of infrastructure. And for that, sir, I'll stand for questions.
Questions for Senator
Excuse me.
Senator Case.
Mr. Chairman, just real quick, I think in some instances, the jurisdiction of, and that's not the right word, but the area that's of concern for a utility might extend past the right of way. And I'm just thinking of trees, for example, and you know, when you have a tree that's could potentially harm the power line, lots of times utilities try to find out about that, talk to the landowner to see if they can do that, and it might be outside the right of way. Like, for example, easements through communities, like an alley, it's a certain width, and the power line's usually on one side of that alley. But they're concerned about trees that are even off the easement. And so it's just a little broader, they have a broader need than you might suspect. And then, anyway.
So, Mr. Case, in that regard, I would assume that Rocky Mountain Power would be in contact with, I would certainly assume if you're going to be doing additional work to what you described, you would call that landowner and say, hey, we've got to take a look at these lines all the way down, and we're going to be flying a little bit over some of the ground out there. Just wanted to let you know. Don't you anticipate that would be the case?
Mr. Chairman, I would not anticipate that. That is what happens.
Yeah.
Okay, that's already standard operating policy, if I may. And to Senator Case's point again, we have facilities in remote areas, forests and everything else. And so we would get with the Forest Service and that type of thing to make folks aware that we would be in the area. Very much like the prior bill, having a reasonable approach and making a contact with the people that are responsible or the owners of those particular properties, facilities, that we do that proper service and let them know.
So, Mr. Cason, are you comfortable with where this bill stands?
Yes, sir. As long as we have the acknowledgement that at least, and I'm speaking only from one electric utility that operates in the state, that we would have the right to access to our facilities by crossing properties for a definitive purpose.
Thank you very much. Rick, appreciate it.
I hope that helps.
We may reserve the right to ask you a question later. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Magagna.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association, and also testifying today on behalf of the Wyoming Wool Growers Association. We certainly would agree with comments made by Mr. Moline. The issue that arises here is a very real issue that needs to be addressed, and we commend the interim Joint Ag Committee for bringing this forward. But as I've analyzed it, I do have some concerns. This is a criminal offense, so it means it needs to be prosecuted by a prosecuting attorney, county attorney. And when you look at the language in here, such as the occupant's use and enjoyment, those are very broad terms and discourage, I would say, a prosecuting attorney who has a big workload from bringing a case like this because of what you get into trying to prove, then I, as the landowner, have to prove that it interfered with my use and enjoyment. And particularly enjoyment is a pretty nebulous and undefined concept there. And as I've thought about this and tried to compare this to other types of trespass, under our criminal trespass laws, if someone trespasses on my private land, they're guilty of a trespass without authorization. They're guilty of a trespass. It doesn't matter whether it interfered with anything I'm doing or my use or my enjoyment, they trespassed. And have to wonder if that wouldn't be a better approach here, that if a drone without authorization flies over private land, that they're guilty of a trespass and don't have to prove the impact on use and enjoyment. They trespass, just like if they physically trespassed on the land. If that approach were taken, then I think we could also build in language that would protect all of those who have a right to be on the land, based more on the activity they're undertaking. If they're checking their power lines, we're not going to say you can't be more than 10 feet off the power line. What we're saying is your activity is authorized, and therefore, to the extent that where the drone flies is consistent with meeting that activity, that it's permissible to do so. So I hesitate to suggest this because I think if that were the approach, it would require pretty much a rewrite of this legislation. But I'm just, while we support this bill, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that it's creating a scenario that simply isn't going to work in the real world for criminal prosecution. If I wanted to bring a civil case against someone and prove that I've been physically, or my enjoyment of my land has been harmed, that's a little different, because then that's my choice. But for a criminal prosecution, I'm just uncomfortable that this is going to really achieve its intended purpose unless it just discourages people from flying drones.
questions of the stock growers? So I've kind of got one, Mr. Magagna, good comments. I mean, a couple nights ago, I was reading and looking at this bill and wondering some of the same things. And then having been down here for a while, thinking to myself, well, maybe the best thing we can do is to get something in the green books and accomplish that. Let this thing roll out a little bit, and always with the ability to come back in with suggestions that you just made. So I'm just kind of visiting out loud with you here. We could certainly doctor on this bill for a while, but I don't want to endanger it. You know what I mean? That's kind of where I'm at. Any thoughts about that?
Mr. Chairman, I certainly would not disagree with that, because I think that we need to raise the profile of the issue. I simply want to make clear our position that if we pass this bill, and we'd certainly support that, that's not the end of this issue, that we need to, perhaps as an interim topic or something, we need to come back and look at, is there a better way to meet the objectives that we all have here in a way that respects everyone's interests? And I certainly recognize that trying to do that in the context of this bill in this session could be very challenging and potentially be the death of the legislation. That's not my intent.
Appreciate that. Mr. Magagna, thank you. We reserve the right to come back to you. Let's continue with testimony
Mr.
on the
Chairman.
bill. Mr. Illoway, please come forward. We're running short on time, I'm sorry to say, but we're going to try to get through as much testimony as we can today, and we'll pick up on Monday if we have to quit. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good
I'm
morning.
Pete Illoway, and today I'm representing the weed and pest control districts. And all I wanted to do was to remind you that when the weed and pest control districts are out spraying, or whether they're out spraying for mosquitoes, or they're out spraying for weeds, they would not necessarily follow a straight line. They do have GPS. I watched one demonstrate in Cody a couple months ago, and they followed the GPS, and they're very, very precise in how to get around on the property. I think you also know about mosquito spraying. They don't stay. They're going to spray where they need to spray for mosquitoes. So I think we need to be careful with this particular piece of legislation. Probably needs to be done, like my good friend Jim said, but I just want to remind you that there are other things besides following a straight line.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Illoway. Any questions on the weed and pest front? Thank you, Pete. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
I'm Terry Armitage. I'm with the Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police here in Wyoming.
A little closer to the microphone.
Sorry about
Terry.
that.
Thank you very much.
I've been an attorney in Wyoming for 35 years, spent half my career with the Attorney General's office, the other half in private practice, worked with law enforcement during most of my career, and I was a prosecutor for a while. So a couple observations. I think Senator Case was right on when he said this area gets gray really quickly.
Yeah.
From the perspective of law enforcement as well as prosecutors, if we could be more specific in the statute like others, it's going to help. If we send a deputy sheriff out because somebody complained about a drone on their property, and that deputy's got to decide, was there substantial interference with use and enjoyment? Who makes that call? That's tough even to write a citation. My other thought, and Senator Cooper brought this up, there's no specific height requirement for these drones. It would be much easier if we agreed on a certain height such that if you get below that with your drone, you can get a citation. If it's high enough up, it's probably not going to be substantially interfering with use and enjoyment anyway. So I would suggest, and I don't know how high drones fly or how high they can fly, but if 50 feet is the bare minimum where we know they're interfering, set it at 100 feet or 200 feet, and then law enforcement and prosecutors have a height to deal with. They know if it's below that height, that's going to be a violation. So I would suggest we suggest in the statute specifically what height is prohibited. And I think taking out the substantial interference would really help. We don't have that, as Mr. McGagna pointed out, we don't have that in our regular trespass statute anyway. And the eye of the beholder, what substantially interfered and didn't. I'm afraid, as written, law enforcement probably won't write citations, and prosecutors probably won't ever write a ticket. You know, both have discretion. So if it is some students trying out a project and they make a mistake, they can decline to prosecute that, or even a law enforcement can decline to write the citation. I think it's important we get it on the books, but the more specific, the better. With that, I'd stand for questions.
Any questions? Senator Perfy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things I'm struggling with, honestly, in terms of law enforcement, is how much time is the drone in your space over your area? If they're hovering, that's really annoying. But if they're going back and forth several times in your space, that's annoying. If they're only doing it one time, that's not annoying. Any thoughts on that? Thank you.
Sure, Chairman Landon, Senator Furphy. My thought on that is if we go back to our regular trespass statute, it doesn't matter whether you go on the property and stay for a week or whether you just cross it, you're trespassing. So I think it's more, in fact, your question might go more towards that substantial interference issue that I would just soon see we remove. In other words, it's like a speeding ticket. If you're driving above the posted speed limit, you can get a citation. If you trespass, you can get a citation.
Appreciate that, Terry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Further testimony. Morning, Mr. Detai. Good to see you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Travis Detai. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Mining Association. We're neutral on the bill, but I just wanted to provide a little information for the committee's consideration. Great testimony from my friends in the agriculture community. Drone technology is being used more and more in the surface mining industry. And we're starting to use it in Wyoming. For example, they're using it more and more for site safety management, surveying and mapping, monitoring and inspection, haul road optimization, stockpile management, and reclamation monitoring. I don't have a real issue with the bill as written. I think, as we start employing more drone technology in our industry, we have excellent communication with landowners, and in the event that you're doing a survey or doing some monitoring and you cross that permit boundary, it's nothing that can't be overcome by good, solid communication with either your adjacent landowner or if you're operating on private land. So again, we have no real issues with the bill, and we're going to watch it and see how it develops. But I just wanted to make the committee aware that, again, as it's been noted several times, this is new technology. We're going somewhere in the future. We're probably going to see more and more of it. And just for your consideration as you move forward on this bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Detai. Appreciate it. Any questions for the Mining Association?
I would note, Mr. Chairman, though, that we share concerns also, especially in the coal industry, about trespassing as well, coming over and snapping some photographs and then using them on a website for negative impact for our industry. So we share those concerns as well, and we think it's very good and it's very important that we're looking at this topic, and we'll pay great attention to see how you guys work and how this unfolds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Detai. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Morning, Kelly. Good to see you.
Good morning, Mr.
Ms. Little,
Chairman.
excuse me. Okay. Go ahead.
Kelly Little, representing the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. I will be very brief because Mr. McGagna basically took the words out of my mouth. My board had a little heartburn over the nebulous nature of the language in the bill, and would like to see some legislation with a little more teeth to it. We do support the bill and we support the concept, but maybe making it a little more detailed would be appropriate. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Little, appreciate that. Ms. Wilkinson, good morning.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Catherine Wilkinson here on behalf of American Property Casualty Insurance Association in opposition to the bill with the way that it is written. Mr. Chairman, buzzing cattle is a totally different thing than a claims crop adjuster flying over and they erroneously go over the line of a large field. Realize their mistake, correct it. So this bill, the way it is written, is criminalizing the act of flying a drone without the owner's permission. Any normal protocol for folks flying drones have the owner's permission. But this bill, just the language that it's written, we do stand in opposition to it. We do think that there needs to be some sort of intent proven that if they are buzzing cattle, absolutely that, that should be a criminal act. But the way the bill is written, we do just have major concerns with the language and feel that intent is missing from this bill. So it's kind of mixing a lot of legal concepts, Mr. Chairman. A little bit of a messy bill. And so I know you're trying to get up to session, so I'll be short and just say we stand in opposition. I'd stand for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question, go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Ms. Wilkerson, it's established in law that trespasses can be subsurface, on the surface, or in the immediate airspace, with intent or without intent. Would you agree that the trespass is trespass? Can you give me your opinion on that, ma'am?
Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. I agree. Trespass is trespass. That does not include intent. But substantially, I'm sorry, let me look at the language. Substantially interferes. The problem, I think, with the way this bill is drafted is that you're mixing a lot of legal concepts into one bill, and it's going to be difficult. I mean, you need, intent substantially interferes. You need to have some sort of intent. Trespass, you just trespass or you don't. That doesn't require intent. So I think that is part of the issue, is that you are criminalizing something with erroneous. Now, it's if you want to take the bill in the direction of trespass, then it needs to be written in a different way, in my opinion. If you want to do it where you're having to prove different elements of intent and substantially interfering, that's kind of a different path. That's my opinion on the bill, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson, appreciate it. We're going to take about one more person on some testimony, and I'm sorry we're not going to get to everyone potentially. Unfortunately, we do have to get upstairs. I'm sorry about that. We'll have to take this back up on Monday, but go ahead, Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kennedy on behalf of the Wyoming Ag Business Association, and I'll try to be very brief. The way I would read this also, we have several members who are aerial applicators and use private airplanes, not unmanned. However, the industry is starting to use those, and I would interpret this as, if you've watched a crop duster before, they will actually pull up well under 50 feet right at the neighbor's field. They stop the application at where they are making it. Why should the rules be different for an unmanned drone than for a manned aircraft? And that would be my only comment, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Cooper.
Sir, wouldn't you say that those applicators have permission to be there?
Mr. Chairman, they do have permission to make that application to that particular property, but if you've watched one work, they come up right at the edge of the field and circle around well under 50 feet where they come off the neighbor's field. And so why should a drone be treated any different than that private aircraft would be my question.
Senator Cooper, go ahead. Yeah.
It's my understanding, sir, that a drone can basically stop, hover, turn in a very tight. I just see that and a drone is an aircraft, basically, whether it's manned or unmanned, but it's not covered in the law. Would you propose that there should be some further language?
Mr. Chairman, I will try to be direct, but this took me in another direction as well. And these machines are also used extensively elsewhere for scouting. And think about conditions that may change in Wyoming over a course of minutes, where I may be scouting a field and all of a sudden we now have a 40-mile-an-hour wind where we had calm conditions when we started. How should I get my drone back to where I'm operating from? Should I take the shortest route so that I can get it back to where I'm operating from, or should I go around with the possibility that weather conditions may force it to land on property that I don't have permission to be on? Yeah.
Mr. Kennedy, we do, and Monday I'll grant you an opportunity to have a little further visit. Anyone else who wants to
Thank you, Mr.
testify
Chairman.
on this bill can certainly do so on Monday. We'll carry it over. Sorry we ran out of time.